Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey everybody, it's Jared. Welcome back to another episode of All Things Crime. Sure appreciate you as viewers and listeners. And man, we are passing lots of views and viewers and subscribers. And so if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and definitely share this episode. I am beyond excited about my guest today. His name is Travis Myers. He's a former detective with NYPD, and he's got, it's amazing how many stories. I had a booth next to him at CrimeCon this last year, and tons of stories, and it's just going to be a bunch of fun. But we're also going to talk about some fairly serious issues as well. So, Travis, welcome to the program, man.
Jared, so nice to see you again, my friend. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Got my, I'm in town for a day or two, and got some eggnog, man. How
ready for the holidays?
How bad can things get when you got that, right?
Yeah.
So, how about you? Are you how's New York doing?
New York is great. It's still here. Life is good for me. Happy fella. Really, no complaints. None whatsoever.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, to start out, you know what? I gotta actually read part of this, man, because first of all, you were a detective back in the 90s is when you started. You said
Correct.
You started under the Dinkins administration,
Yeah,
and then you served also in the Giuliani
I was hired
years,
under him, but most of my time I worked through the Giuliani administration. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, the key to that, I think, is people need to understand what New York was like in the early 90s. And especially prior to Giuliani coming in and actually allowing the police to do police work and cleaning things up. And at one point you said there were like 2,400 homicides a year in New York City.
Yes.
And if you put that into perspective, out of 365 days out of the year, that's what, 7, 8 homicides a day.
And I worked in the Bronx too, which was a busy area, and business was good. And I'm making a joke, but it was a busy place. The Bronx was, well, the city as a whole. All the way through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. It was a continual thing. In fact, what was that? I think in 1969 was the year that they actually broke 1,000 homicides for the first time. And throughout the 70s, it continued to get worse. And then, of course, in the late 80s, early 90s, the crack epidemic exploded, and a lot of that, though, I'm going to, which maybe we'll get into a little bit more of, I will actually blame on politics and politicians because, for us, it's going to sound like I'm going to beat up on the cops a little bit, and I'm not. Please understand that, because nobody loves the cop more than me. But that being said, a lot of the problems that we have with modern policing, okay, yes, are the police departments themselves, but not. It's because it's the politicians and the political will to get the job done. You see, us, the foot soldiers in this thing, the cops and the detectives, and that goes all the way up to chiefs and commissioners as well. Really, we're the lowest rung on the ladder when it comes to law enforcement. In fact, I'll even maybe argue the point a little bit that we are not really law enforcement. Why? Because we don't get to enforce shit. We basically are more or less truth seekers. We're the first on the scene, the first to assess the situation, and of course, detectives later on to investigate a situation. And all we get to do is present it to the courts, and then it's up to the district attorneys to decide. And usually, when they decide, they're deciding, whether or not it's a winnable case, if it's worth being bothered with. It's got nothing to do with justice. And it sounds very, very negative, but from my side of things, I don't believe in justice. There's no such thing, sadly. And it comes down to quite often a district attorney grabbing a case, looking at it, reading it over. Can we win this or not? And if they decide it's going to be difficult, it goes in the trash. And that's sadly effect. It has nothing to do
Well, it
with.
goes in the trash, or maybe they kick it back to you and say, "Go get more evidence."
Oh no, absolutely. But again, that's if they think that it's a winnable case.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? And so sadly for your listeners to understand, again, and I'm not beating up on the police department, but I am beating up on the system, that the police, again, are the truth seekers. We seek the evidence, we catch the bad guys, we put it all together, but we don't get to enforce anything. It's really not up to us. It goes into the courts. And the police quite often get the blame for law and order when we may be the law, but we have nothing to do with the order. That's up to the courts. And the courts, sadly, and it comes down to politicians. Even then, to the poor ADAs who are overworked and underpaid, just like everybody else in the system, they're the whole thing, where shit rolls downhill, and sadly for them, they're subject to the decisions of the politicians as well.
Yeah. Well, I actually had an attorney on a few episodes ago, and he's out in L.A. and he was in the prosecutor's office for quite a while, and he was saying something very similar. He's like, as an ADA, he couldn't survive in L.A. or his wife was working basically for a nonprofit, and he's like, we don't get paid very much, and we were so overworked. He's like,
Absolutely.
we're trying to raise a couple kids, and he's like, I was putting in amazing number of hours. He was doing a lot of child, sex trafficking type cases, which are really, really difficult and taxing, especially as a human being. It's like, just having to watch the evidence, the video and things like that. And it's just brutal. And, I think, especially for you guys, and I think this kind of, there's threads that go across here. So as you know, I have a military background, and whenever I'm doing any research on past wars and things, that, you take the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was so winnable, it's just crazy. And yet we
We could
hear
have sent,
time.
and I'm not knocking when I say this. I'm not knocking our enemy, but
Yeah.
the size and scale in the Vietnam War, we could have sent the Boy Scouts over there and walked over that place in a week, and that's obviously a very exaggerated statement, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's no reason that should have went on for years and years and years, and the same with the
No.
nonsense that we do in the Middle East now. It's so much more political than actually getting the job done, which is an absolute disgrace and shameful. And as a veteran myself,
and it's, yeah, exactly. That's the
embarrasses
same
me.
thing. What I was saying is just like you were describing with, once the politicians get involved and then they push down certain policies and certain actions and things that, you can do and versus what you can't do. Like they in Vietnam, they said you can't go into Laos and other countries, you have to stay in Vietnam. Well, the bad guys, they found that out. And so what do you think they did? They
Yeah.
were moving from North and South Vietnam in the other countries. They were in Cambodia, they were in Laos, they were all over the place. And, that when it comes down to people that don't obey the law or don't, abide by certain principles anyway, and if you're stupid enough to handicap your own side, and whether that be law enforcement or the military, then of course you're going to lose. And it's at least going to take a lot longer, and it's going to be a lot more expensive, both in resources, but most importantly in lives. And, you think about, for example, in New York City, when politicians are basically saying, you can't do stop and frisk, you can't arrest people that steal something that's under $1,000.
Correct.
They restrict the amount of actual enforcement that the cops can do. Not only does that put the citizens in danger, but it also puts cops in danger. And sometimes you just look at them and you're like, why would you do that? That just doesn't make sense. That's like me as a dad saying, you know what, son, if some kid's pummeling on you and he's punching you in the face, you can't do anything until he punches you 10 times.
Whatever.
It just doesn't
Right.
make any sense.
Well, and sadly, of course, it emboldens. Not only does it embolden current criminals, it creates new criminals because people aren't afraid. We've all seen it now with this nonsense in New York City and California, all over the nation, where people are just walking into, the CVS or your local Walgreens and walking out with as much stuff as they can put into a trash bag, you know,
Yeah.
with no worries about getting locked up at all, because if they are, they're released immediately, you know? And this has nothing to do with the police departments. And I would even say so much, it's not the ADAs who are working the cases, but it does have everything to do with the district attorney himself and with the mayor involved. In fact, when it comes to, again, back to law enforcement in general, forget about, you know, screw the president. The president has nothing to do with this, okay? And not that I'm usually happy with any of our presidents either, but the president has nothing to do with this. But every mayor, every single mayor in this country, all right, in every city and every town has the power to say, no, we're not doing this, okay? But instead of stopping crime, they embolden criminals, all right? They allow it to happen. They almost, are ask forgiveness, when somebody's arrested or, God forbid, roughed up a little bit by the officers who show up.
Yeah.
It's absolutely is disgraceful.
So
And
I got a little
it's
story, man. I was actually in Houston,
mhm,
and I went to, I think it was a CVS. It was either Walgreens or a CVS. And it was just maybe 2 blocks away from a really nice hotel where I was staying. And, in the kind of the business district of Houston. And then it was just, I don't know if you know, there's a beltway around the Houston, the major city
yeah,
part. And so this Walgreens it wasn't in a bad spot. I mean, it didn't look like a bad spot, but I'm in there. I'm, trying to buy some Gatorade and some other things that I wanted to just walk back to my hotel room. And this guy walks in right behind me, and I'm trying to check out, ring my stuff up, and he just walks over to a rack, grabs a few things, and the ladies behind the counter are screaming at him. They're like, "Don't you take that? Don't you take that?" And he just he's like, "Oh, I'm not." And but they knew the second that he walked
sure,
in, they spotted him just that fast, and they were like, "This guy's going to come in and he's going to rob us." And sure enough, he just grabbed, I don't know, a few things off of the little shelf right there and just walked out. They were,
mhm.
they were trying to run around the counter and try to grab him. I don't know what they would have done if they could have actually caught him before he went out the doors, because, these ladies aren't going to physically be able to stop him. But,
No, no.
that
And then
kind
you
of
know what?
stuff.
Again, if the police show up, they're not going to arrest the guy. If they arrest him, the courts are going to let him out. And God forbid they're hurt, or they may even lose their jobs because Walgreens or CVS will say, well, we don't want you interacting with these people. Just let them take it.
Yeah.
When they're trying to do the right thing. It really has gotten just so ridiculous in the last few years.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's adding up though, because some of these stores are losing hundreds of millions of dollars a year in theft and pilferage. And I don't know how big of
Well,
a
they're
company.
closing. They're
Yeah.
actually closing. There are,
Yeah.
cities who were losing them, by the dozens. They're closing 5, 10, 15, 20 stores because it doesn't make sense to be there anymore.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is, though, is, so many people will say, "Oh, well, it's a bad neighborhood, blah, blah, blah." No, there are so many good, decent, innocent people living in these neighborhoods who need these services. They need to
Yeah.
be able to get their medicine. They need to be able to buy toothbrush, toothpaste, whatever it is. And, now they're going to close the store because of a handful of miscreants who were allowed to run wild by who? The local politicians. It does always, again, come back to the politicians, because the police officers, for the most part, police departments are more than willing to do their job if they're allowed to.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.